Picture this. You're walking through the moonlit gardens of Emperor Nero's palace in Rome, and the year is 64 AD. The marble pathways glisten under what you initially think is torchlight, but as you move closer, the horrifying truth becomes clear. Those aren't torches illuminating the emperor's party. Those are human beings, coated in pitch and set ablaze, their agonized screams providing the soundtrack to Rome's most elite social gathering. You watch in frozen horror as a pregnant woman, her belly swollen with child, writhes in flames, while Rome's aristocrats toast their wine glasses and laugh at her suffering. But whispers follow in their wake, because everyone knows the terrifying truth. The woman burning alive in front of you was condemned not for any crime she committed, but because Emperor Nero needed scapegoats for the great fire of Rome, and he had chosen an entire religious community to bear the blame. What Nero did to these innocent people represents one of the most calculated acts of mass murder, disguised as entertainment in recorded history. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. What you're about to hear isn't just another tale of Roman brutality. It's the story of how absolute power can transform justice into spectacle, how religious persecution can masquerade as entertainment, and how an entire civilization can convince itself that burning pregnant women alive is not only acceptable, but enjoyable. The name Nero might be familiar to you, but the specific horrors of his human torch gardens will haunt you long after you finish listening. Let's start with the fire that changed everything. July 18th, 64 AD, a date that would forever alter the landscape of Rome and the destiny of thousands of innocent people. You're a Roman citizen sleeping peacefully in your apartment building when the smell of smoke jolts you awake. At first, you think it's just another kitchen fire, the kind that happens when oil lamps are knocked over or cooking fires aren't properly extinguished. But this smoke is different, thicker, more acrid, carrying with it the sound of splintering wood and distant screams. You stumble to your window and see what nightmares are made of. The entire district is ablaze. Flames leap from building to building, carried by summer winds that turn Rome's wooden structures into kindling. The fire moves with such speed and ferocity that escape seems impossible. You grab what few possessions you can carry and join the flood of people pouring into the streets, but even the streets aren't safe. The flames follow you, racing along rooftops and collapsing walls that block your path to safety. For 6 days and 7 nights, Rome burns. The fire consumes 14 of the city's 14 districts, reducing the greatest city in the world to ash and rubble. Entire neighborhoods disappear overnight. Ancient temples that have stood for centuries crumble into dust. The homes of rich and poor alike become identical piles of charred debris. When the flames finally die down, 3/4 of Rome lies in ruins, and hundreds of thousands of people are homeless, hungry, and desperate for someone to blame. This is where Nero makes his fatal miscalculation. The emperor, who had been performing in his villa at Antium when the fire started, returns to find his capital destroyed and his people furious. Rumors are already spreading that he started the fire himself to clear land for his grandiose building projects. Some whisper that he played his lyre and sang about the burning of Troy while Rome burned around him. Whether these stories are true doesn't matter. What matters is that people believe them, and their anger threatens Nero's hold on power. But Nero is nothing if not politically cunning. Rather than accept responsibility or address the genuine grievances of his suffering people, he chooses to redirect their rage toward a convenient target, the Christians. This small religious sect, followers of a crucified Jewish preacher named Jesus, had been growing quietly in Rome's underground. They were perfect scapegoats, foreign, secretive, and practicing a religion that many Romans found disturbing and unpatriotic. The arrest begins at dawn on a crisp autumn morning in 64 AD. You're a young Christian woman named Lydia, 7 months pregnant with your first child. You've been attending secret gatherings in the home of an elderly believer named Marcus, where you sing hymns, share bread, and discuss the teachings of Christ. Your husband Daniel works as a carpenter, and you've been carefully saving money to prepare for your baby's arrival. Life isn't easy for Christians in Rome, but you've managed to practice your faith quietly while avoiding official attention. Until today. The sound of hobnailed boots on cobblestones jolts you awake before dawn. Through your window you see them, Praetorian guards in full armour, their faces hidden behind bronze masks that gleam like death in the torchlight. They're moving systematically through the neighbourhood, kicking down doors and dragging people from their homes. The screams of your neighbours echo through the narrow streets as families are torn apart and loaded onto ox-drawn carts like cargo. Your husband tries to barricade the door, but it splinters like kindling under the guards' assault. They pour into your small apartment, their swords drawn and their movements efficient with practice. One of them, a scarred veteran with cold eyes, looks you over with the calculating gaze of a cattle buyer. This one's pregnant. He announces to his companions, perfect for the games. You don't understand what he means by the games, but the cruel smile on his face tells you it's nothing good. They chain your hands behind your back, the iron shackles cutting into your wrists as they drag you toward the cart. Your husband fights desperately to reach you, but a sword pommel to his skull drops him unconscious to the floor. The last thing you see of your home is Daniel's blood pooling on the wooden planks where you'd planned to place your baby's cradle. The cart journey to the Circus Maximus takes you through streets you've walked freely for years, but now they look different. The burned districts stretch as far as you can see, filled with homeless families camping in the ruins of their former lives. Some of them point at your cart and shout accusations. Christ killers, fire starters, enemies of Rome. The propaganda has already begun, and Nero's scapegoating strategy is working perfectly. You're crammed into the cart with dozens of other Christians, men, women, children, elderly believers who can barely walk. Some you recognize from the secret gatherings, others are strangers who share only your faith and your fate. There's old Marcus, the man who opened his home for worship, his white beard stained with blood from the beating the guards gave him. There's young Timothy, barely 14, clutching a wooden cross carved by his father. And there's Helena, like you, heavily pregnant and trying to protect her unborn child with hands bound behind her back. The conversations in the cart reveal the scope of Nero's plan. The guards aren't being selective. They're arresting every known Christian in Rome, from wealthy merchants who secretly funded the community to slaves who had converted in their masters' households. Some prisoners whisper about escape plans, others pray quietly in small groups, but most simply stare ahead with the hollow expressions of people who understand their situation is hopeless. When you arrive at the holding cells beneath the Circus Maximus, the reality of your situation becomes clear. These aren't temporary detention facilities, they're human warehouses designed to process large numbers of condemned prisoners as efficiently as possible. The cells are cramped, filthy, and designed to break spirits before the actual executions begin. You're shoved into a stone chamber with 20 other women, given a handful of mouldy grain, and told that tomorrow the real entertainment begins. That night, trying to sleep on the damp stone floor with your unborn child kicking restlessly in your womb, you hear other prisoners sharing information gleaned from guards and previous inmates. The executions won't be simple beheadings or crucifixions. Nero has something special planned, a new form of spectacle that will simultaneously eliminate his enemies and provide unprecedented entertainment for the Roman mob. The next morning brings your first glimpse of the true scope of Nero's vision. Guards escort you and the other prisoners to an upper level where you can see the arena floor being prepared. Hundreds of workers are setting up what looks like a garden party. Elegant couches arranged around manicured lawns, tables laden with delicacies, and servants preparing for what appears to be a peaceful evening celebration. But then you notice the other preparations. Tall wooden stakes being driven into the ground at regular intervals, barrels of the thick, dark substance being positioned near each stake, and most horrifyingly, teams of executioners testing their ropes and chains. One of the guards, enjoying your obvious confusion, explains what you're seeing. "The Emperor is hosting a special banquet tonight," he says with evident pride. "The finest citizens of Rome will dine under the stars, and you lot will provide the lighting. It's really quite beautiful when you think about it. Your deaths will illuminate the rebirth of Rome from the ashes of the fire you caused." The accusation is absurd, and everyone knows it. But accusations don't need to be true to be useful. Nero has declared that Christians started the Great Fire through some combination of religious fanaticism and foreign conspiracy. The evidence for this claim is non-existent, but evidence is irrelevant when you need scapegoats and have the power to create them. The preparation of the human torches begins at sunset, and the methodical cruelty of the process reveals the calculating mind behind the spectacle. This isn't random violence or uncontrolled rage. It's carefully planned theatre designed to maximize both suffering and visual impact. Teams of executioners work with the efficiency of craftsmen, each group responsible for a different aspect of the transformation from human being to lighting fixture. First comes the stripping, conducted with business-like efficiency that somehow makes it more degrading than if it had been done with obvious cruelty. Your clothes are removed not with violence, but with the careful movements of people preparing a sacrifice. The guards handle your pregnant body with the same casual disregard they might show toward a side of beef being prepared for roasting. The other women around you sob and try to cover themselves, but modesty is a luxury that no longer applies to your situation. Next comes the coating process, and this is where the true horror begins. The substance they spread on your skin isn't ordinary tar or pitch. It's a specially prepared mixture designed to burn slowly and intensely while adhering to human flesh like a second skin. The smell alone is overwhelming, a combination of petroleum, animal fat, and chemical additives that makes your eyes water and your throat constrict. But it's the sensation of the thick, cold substance being painted across your skin that truly breaks your spirit. The workers applying the pitch work with practiced hands, covering every inch of your body except your face. They want the crowd to see your expressions as you burn, to watch the life drain from your eyes for maximum entertainment value. Your swollen belly receives special attention, the workers joking among themselves about whether the baby will burn from the outside in or be cooked from within like meat in an oven. As they work, you can hear similar preparations happening throughout the garden. The sounds create a symphony of horror, the wet slapping of pitch being applied to skin, the muffled sobs of victims trying to maintain some dignity in their final hours, the casual conversation of executioners discussing technical details like artists critiquing each other's work. "Make sure you get good coverage around the joints," one calls to another. That's where the flame spreads fastest. The Roman guests begin arriving as the sun sets, and their reaction to the preparations reveals the complete moral corruption of Nero's court. These aren't bloodthirsty barbarians or sadistic criminals. They're senators, wealthy merchants, celebrated artists, and respected philosophers. They recline on silk cushions, sample exotic delicacies, and discuss the latest philosophical treatises, while human beings are prepared for burning just yards away. You recognize some of the faces from public ceremonies and cultural events. There's Lucius Annaeus Seneca, Nero's former tutor, and a man famous for his writings on ethics and virtue. He examines the prepared victims with the detached interest of a scholar studying an interesting natural phenomenon. There's Gaius Petronius, author of sophisticated literature, who makes witty observations about the artistic arrangement of the human torches. These are men who write beautiful poetry about love and honor, yet they show no more emotion watching your preparation than they would observing the arrangement of flowers. The lighting ceremony begins with Nero himself applying the first flame. The emperor, dressed in flowing robes and wearing a crown of laurel leaves, carries a golden torch as he moves among the prepared victims. He pauses at each stake, making brief comments to his guests about the artistic composition or the anticipated duration of the burning. When he reaches you, his eyes linger on your pregnant form with something that might be curiosity or aesthetic appreciation. "This one should provide particularly interesting entertainment," he announces to the crowd. The question is whether the child will survive long enough to burn separately, or if they'll die together as one flame. The guests chuckle appreciatively at his wit, raising their wine cups in salute to their emperor's creativity. The casual nature of their response is perhaps more horrifying than the torture itself. You're not even human enough to warrant their serious attention. When Nero touches his torch to the pitch covering your feet, the pain is unlike anything you could have imagined. The flames race up your body with hungry efficiency, the specially prepared coating ensuring that the fire burns hot and bright while prolonging your agony for maximum effect. Your skin bubbles and peels, while the pitch beneath continues feeding the flames that consume you inch by inch. But it's not just the physical pain that destroys you. It's the sound of the party continuing around your suffering. The guests don't stop their conversations or pause their meal to acknowledge your torment. If anything, your screams seem to enhance their enjoyment of the evening. They use your burning body as a conversation piece, debating the technical aspects of the execution, while servants refill their wine cups and present new courses. Notice how the flame burns more intensely around the abdomen, one guest observes with scholarly interest. The additional fat from pregnancy provides excellent fuel for sustained combustion. Another responds with equal detachment. Yes, but observe the color variations. The pitch creates those beautiful blue and green hues that you simply can't achieve with wood or oil. The other human torches arranged throughout the garden create a hellish constellation of suffering. Each one represents a family destroyed, a life ended in the most brutal way possible, yet they serve merely as ambient lighting for an evening's entertainment. Some victims die quickly, their bodies succumbing to shock or smoke inhalation within minutes. Others burn for hours, their pitch-coated forms providing steady illumination while guests finish their meals and engage in philosophical discussions about the nature of justice. You try to focus on your faith during these final moments, reciting prayers you learned in secret gatherings, but the pain makes coherent thought impossible. The flames have reached your chest now, and each breath brings superheated air into your lungs while the fire consumes the pitch covering your skin. Your unborn child kicks frantically inside your womb, perhaps sensing the approaching end, and this small movement brings you a moment of profound grief for the life that will never be lived. The party continues around your pyre with obscene normalcy. Servants circulate with trays of delicacies, while guests recline on comfortable couches, their faces illuminated by the flames consuming your body. Musicians play soft melodies that mix grotesquely with your dying screams. Poets compose verses celebrating the emperor's wisdom in providing such innovative entertainment. The greatest minds of the ancient world are using your agony as inspiration for their art. What makes this scene even more disturbing is the religious context that Nero has constructed around the mass murder. The emperor hasn't simply ordered executions, he's created an elaborate narrative that portrays the burning Christians as divine justice in action. In his speeches to the crowd, Nero explains that these people brought the Great Fire upon Rome through their foreign superstitions and anti-Roman activities. Their deaths aren't just punishment, they're purification, a cleansing ritual that will restore divine favor to the empire. This religious framing allows the guests to participate in mass murder while maintaining their sense of moral superiority. They're not watching innocent people burn. They're witnessing the elimination of enemies who threatened Roman civilization. The Christian suffering isn't tragic. It's cosmic justice being served in the most appropriate way possible. This psychological framework transforms the garden party from an atrocity into a patriotic celebration. The historian Tacitus, writing decades later, would struggle to find words adequate to describe what he had witnessed or heard described by survivors. To dispel the rumor, he wrote, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt, to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. But Tacitus's clinical language fails to capture the personal horror experienced by individual victims. You feel your consciousness fragmenting as the flames reach your face, the pain becoming so overwhelming that your mind begins to disconnect from your body as a mercy. The last thing you're aware of is the sound of laughter and conversation continuing around your pyre, the casual indifference of people for whom your death is merely part of the evening's ambience. The Human Torch Gardens became Nero's signature entertainment for weeks following the Great Fire. Each night brought new victims and fresh horrors as the emperor refined his techniques for maximum spectacle. He experimented with different pitch formulations to create various flame colors, tested positioning arrangements to optimize lighting coverage, and even commissioned special viewing platforms so that guests could observe the burning from multiple angles. The selection of victims revealed the systematic nature of Nero's persecution. Christian families were rounded up wholesale, from wealthy converts who had hosted secret gatherings to slaves who had embraced the new faith in their masters' households. But Nero showed particular cruelty toward pregnant women and mothers with small children, understanding instinctively that their suffering would provide the most dramatic entertainment for his guests. One particularly horrific innovation was Nero's decision to burn families together, but in sequence. Children would be forced to watch their parents burn before being lit themselves, while spouses were made to witness their loved one's agony, knowing their own turn was approaching. The psychological torture preceding the physical torture added layers of suffering that delighted the emperor's guests, who appreciated the sophisticated cruelty of watching people die emotionally before they died physically. The emperor's garden parties attracted visitors from across the empire, as word spread about the unique entertainment being offered in Rome. Foreign dignitaries, wealthy tourists, and even delegations from client kingdoms made special trips to witness what was being called the greatest spectacle since the gladiatorial games began. Nero took pride in these visitors, viewing their attendance as recognition of his artistic innovation and political wisdom. But not all Romans were entertained by the Human Torch Gardens. Even in a society accustomed to brutal public executions, many citizens found Nero's spectacles excessive and disturbing. Some worried that such extreme cruelty might anger the gods and bring divine retribution upon Rome. Others questioned whether burning pregnant women could truly be justified, regardless of their religious beliefs. These concerns were whispered in private, as open criticism of the emperor's entertainment choices could result in joining the Christians on their pyres. The technical aspects of creating effective human torches required considerable experimentation and expertise. Palace records, preserved in fragments that survived Nero's eventual downfall, reveal the methodical approach taken to perfect this new form of execution. Different pitch formulations were tested on condemned criminals to determine which provided the best combination of flame intensity, burn duration, and visual appeal. The emperor's craftsmen developed specialized stakes designed to hold victims at optimal angles for both burning efficiency and audience viewing. They created restraint systems that prevented victims from collapsing too quickly while ensuring they remained conscious long enough to provide extended entertainment. Even the spacing between torches was carefully calculated to provide adequate lighting for the guests while preventing the flames from interfering with each other. Some of the most chilling documents describe Nero's personal involvement in these technical refinements. The emperor didn't simply order the executions and walk away. He actively participated in perfecting the process, making suggestions for improvements and personally testing new techniques on condemned prisoners. His hands-on approach to mass murder revealed a man who had completely lost any sense of human empathy or moral restraint. The pregnancy of many victims added an additional layer of complexity to the executions that Nero exploited for maximum horror. Palace physicians were consulted about the best methods for ensuring that both mother and unborn child suffered appropriately. Some recommended techniques that would cause premature labor during the burning process, providing the spectacle of birth and death occurring simultaneously. Others suggested methods for keeping pregnant victims conscious longer, allowing guests to observe their maternal instincts even as flames consumed their bodies. These medical consultations reveal the systematic nature of Nero's cruelty. This wasn't impulsive violence born of anger or madness. It was calculated torture, designed by educated professionals and implemented with scientific precision. The emperor's human torch gardens represented the marriage of Roman engineering efficiency with unlimited sadistic imagination, creating a form of entertainment that had never existed before and would never be replicated on such a scale. The psychological impact on the executions themselves provides another window into the systematic dehumanization required to maintain such a program. Guards and technicians who initially showed reluctance or revulsion gradually became inured to the horror through repeated exposure and careful psychological conditioning. They were taught to view the victims as enemies of Rome rather than innocent people, and their successful completion of assigned tasks was rewarded with bonuses, promotions, and social recognition. Some executioners developed genuine enthusiasm for their work, competing to create the most spectacular or innovative burning techniques. They took pride in their ability to prolong suffering or create particularly beautiful flame effects. This professional pride in mass murder demonstrates how completely the moral framework of Roman society had been corrupted by Nero's influence and example. The end of the Human Torch Gardens came not from moral awakening or popular revulsion, but from practical considerations. The supply of Christian victims began to dwindle as the community was systematically eliminated, while the cost of maintaining such elaborate executions strained even the imperial treasury. Additionally, some of Nero's advisors worried that the extreme nature of the entertainments was beginning to generate more criticism than approval, potentially undermining rather than strengthening the emperor's political position. The final garden party took place on a cold November night in 64 AD, nearly 4 months after the Great Fire that had started the persecution. By this point, most of Rome's Christian community had been eliminated, and Nero was forced to use prisoners from other groups to maintain his supply of human torches. The last victims included Jewish rebels, captured Germanic tribesmen, and even some Roman criminals whose crimes had nothing to do with the fire or religion. Among these final victims was a young mother named Sarah, captured during the initial Christian roundups, but kept alive because her pregnancy was too advanced for immediate execution. She had given birth in the holding cells, delivering her daughter on filthy straw while chained to a stone wall. For 3 weeks, she had somehow managed to keep her baby alive in the hellish conditions of the prison, sharing her meager rations and using her own body heat to protect the infant from the cold and damp. On that final night, Nero made the decision to burn mother and child together as the evening's grand finale. The baby, too young to be coated with pitch, was simply tied to her mother's chest, creating what the emperor called a double flame of justice. The sight of Sarah trying to shield her infant, even as the flames consumed them both, finally broke the composure of some guests, but their discomfort only seemed to enhance Nero's enjoyment of the spectacle. The aftermath of the Human Torch Gardens extended far beyond the immediate victims. The mass murder of Rome's Christian community created a precedent for religious persecution that would echo through centuries of imperial history. Future emperors would look to Nero's example when dealing with groups they considered threats to Roman stability, understanding that extreme violence against religious minorities could be politically beneficial if properly presented to the public. The psychological impact on Roman society was equally profound. Citizens who had witnessed or participated in the entertainments found their capacity for empathy permanently altered. The normalization of such extreme cruelty made lesser forms of violence seem reasonable by comparison. A society that could watch pregnant women burn for entertainment had crossed a moral threshold from which there was no return. But perhaps most significantly, the Human Torch Gardens revealed the fundamental emptiness of Roman claims to civilization and moral superiority. Here was the most advanced society in the world, producer of magnificent art and sophisticated philosophy, demonstrating that intellectual achievement and technological progress provide no protection against moral barbarism. The same culture that created beautiful poetry and groundbreaking architecture also created new forms of torture for the entertainment of its elite. The individual stories of Nero's victims deserve to be remembered not just as historical curiosities, but as testaments to human dignity under impossible circumstances. These people faced the most horrible deaths imaginable while maintaining their faith, protecting their children, and refusing to renounce the beliefs that had brought them to this end. Their courage in the face of ultimate evil stands as a permanent rebuke to the society that murdered them. When Nero finally fell from power 4 years later, the Human Torch Gardens were among the crimes cited by his enemies as evidence of his unfitness to rule. But this posthumous condemnation rang hollow, coming from many of the same senators and aristocrats who had attended his garden parties and applauded his innovations in mass murder. Their criticism wasn't moral, it was political, motivated by their desire to distance themselves from a failed emperor, rather than genuine remorse for the atrocities they had witnessed and enjoyed. The physical evidence of Nero's gardens was quickly erased after his death, the stakes removed and the ground replanted with innocent flowers and trees. But the location remained cursed in the minds of many Romans, who reported strange phenomena for decades afterward. Unexplained lights moving through the darkness, sounds of crying that seemed to come from underground, and an persistent smell of burning flesh that no amount of perfume could mask. Today, the Vatican stands near the site where many of these Christians died, their ashes mixed with the soil that now supports one of Christianity's holiest locations. The irony would not have been lost on Nero, who could never have imagined that the religion he tried to eliminate through such spectacular cruelty would eventually conquer the empire he ruled and outlast the civilization that created him. The story of Nero's human torches reminds us that the capacity for evil exists not just in obviously twisted individuals, but in entire societies that convince themselves that atrocity is entertainment, that murder is justice, and that the suffering of the innocent is an acceptable price for political convenience. The emperor who turned human beings into garden lighting was supported by thousands of citizens who found nothing wrong with using pregnant women as torches to illuminate their dinner parties. These weren't ignorant barbarians acting from primitive impulses. They were educated, sophisticated people who made conscious choices to participate in or enable mass murder for their own enjoyment. Their crimes were made worse, not better, by their intelligence and cultural achievements. They knew better and chose evil anyway, demonstrating that moral progress doesn't automatically follow from technological or intellectual advancement. The victims of Nero's gardens died forgotten and unrecorded, their names lost to history, while their murderer's name became legendary. But their suffering echoes forward through time, reminding us that behind every great civilization's achievements lie countless unnamed victims, whose pain made those achievements possible. The light of Roman culture was literally fueled by the burning bodies of innocents, and we honor their memory best by refusing to let their stories disappear into the comfortable myths we tell ourselves about human progress. The flames that consumed those Christians in Nero's garden have long since burned out, but the questions their deaths raise about power, cruelty, and complicity remain as urgent today as they were 2,000 years ago. In a world where systematic abuse still hides behind legal complexities and political necessities, where the suffering of the vulnerable still provides entertainment for the powerful, and where societies still find ways to rationalize the unthinkable when it serves their interests, the screams of Nero's victims continue to echo, demanding that we remember and bear witness to the cost of looking away. Before you go, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more forgotten tales from history's darkest corners. And share your thoughts in the comments. I love reading them and hearing your perspectives on these incredible stories from our past.